Welcome to Pure Nonfiction, the podcast interviewing documentary filmmakers. I'm your host, Tom Powers, the documentary programmer for the Toronto International Film Festival and Doc NYC, and coming up in March, the Miami Film Festival. This episode is the start of Season 3. My guests are Laura Poitras and journalist Henrik Moltke. Poitras first came to attention with her 2006 film, My Country, set in Baghdad, and her follow-up called The Oath, filmed in Yemen and Guantanamo Bay. But she rose to even greater prominence in summer 2013 when she released this video on the Guardian website.
My name's Ed Snowden. I'm 29 years old. I work for Booz Allen Hamilton as an infrastructure analyst for NSA in Hawaii.
Poitras and Glenn Greenwald broke the Snowden story and have been continuously reporting about NSA surveillance ever since. Poitras directed the Oscar-winning documentary Citizen4, and last year she used government documents for an art installation called Astro Noise at the Whitney Museum. She joined with Greenwald and Jeremy Scahill to co-found the Intercept website for independent journalism. But she stepped away last year to spend more time on the website Field of Vision for short works of documentary journalism. Now she's collaborated with Moltke on a new short for Field of Vision called Project X. What is Project X? If you've ever wandered in downtown Manhattan, you may have noticed a windowless skyscraper in the brutalist architectural style at 33 Thomas Street. It's not a widely known address. I forget that Manhattan even has a Thomas Street, and my name is Thomas. But the building does have a cult following, including a Wikipedia page. The film Project X complements an article written by Moltke and Ryan Gallagher for The Intercept titled Titan Point, the NSA's spy hub in New York, hidden in plain sight. The article draws upon the Snowden archives to detail the NSA's relationship with AT&T that occupies 33 Thomas Street. The film is a mood piece, capturing the landscapes on a nighttime drive that an NSA official might make from Maryland to Manhattan. In a voiceover, the actor Rami Malek reads from an NSA handbook.
The purpose of this handbook is to provide proper procedures and guidelines when traveling on official business in support of the program. The program has vehicles available for visiting sites that require U.S. government anonymity. Keys are available from redacted, on the second floor of the redacted, building and room redacted, and in the file cabinet outside the program director's office.
It's a haunting piece of filmmaking that's backed up by months of investigative reporting. In late November, a few weeks after Donald Trump's election, I met with Poitras and Moltke to discuss Project X. We sat down at the School of Visual Arts, where I teach in the MFA Social Documentary program. I started by asking how they met.
Okay, so Henrik reached out to me. I was living in Berlin, and I'd recently come back from Hong Kong, where I'd met Edward Snowden and was reporting on the documents with Der Spiegel, and we wanted to expand the reporting. And Henrik had gone down to Rio and met with Glenn, and Glenn highly recommended that they meet. And so you had to work.
I actually tried to contact you before we got in contact through Glenn, but you were very busy, understandably, at the time.
Yeah, I wasn't in a very trusting mood, so random strangers reaching out.
I can only imagine. And so, Henrik, what was your background?
I am a journalist, and I had been working for about a year before then on a radio documentary about the physicality of the internet. And I'd actually been pursuing a story which led us to this one much later about this mythical room 641A in San Francisco. And I'd gone out to cable stations a couple of months earlier on the West Coast. And so I was already tuned into all this. And when I saw the Snowden video, the first one on Facebook through a friend, I just felt I had to somehow get in touch with Laura, because I felt like many people I'm sure did, that I was already part of the story, and so it took a couple of months, but eventually I met with Laura.
And then what has been the nature of the work you've been doing together?
Well, so after that, I sort of switched a bit modes from documentary to more traditional investigative journalism because that's what I felt the documents demanded, especially at the time because we were still reporting news. And I mean, this is for Laura to respond to, but I felt my role also was more helpful in trying to get the reporting out there while, Laura had both that and she had a documentary film she was working on. And so there was a lot of stuff going on. And so I tried to just focus on the documents.
Yeah, I think for both of us, the priority in that first phase was the print reporting and the news. And so we did a story that was very big in Europe about how partners such as Denmark are working with the NSA. So we were doing the sort of the hard news stuff. But I think for both of us, our perspectives and the way that we approach the work that we do is as much kind of narrative driven or storytelling driven combined with journalistic principles. And so after that initial wave, I finished Citizen 4 and then relocated back to New York and was working on an exhibition for the Whitney, which pulled from the Snowden material, but in a different kind of a way, not more trying to capture the kind of what you can draw from the material visually, not just news. And I asked Henrik to come with me to New York and help assist with the kind of research end of it, because we knew that there would be a need for sort of heavy research part of it and as part of the exhibition. So he came to work on the Whitney show, and then also we had agreed to collaborate with ProPublica and the New York Times on a story about the relationship between AT&T and NSA.
This was one of those very complicated stories that you have to be very stubborn to sort of nail, because it was not in the documents. It was not easily provable that I think everybody who had reported on the documents had a clear feeling that AT&T was a partner. But to get from there to actually being able to prove it in a sort of way that is not easy to shoot down took some time. And so I had spent some time digging deep in the archive and trying to connect. And my method, and I guess at the time, but still is to sort of look for the physical traces. And for that story, I was able to find a document talking about the Tokushima earthquake and how one of the collection points in the NSA system had been down, and the day it came back up live was the same day when a specific cable that landed in a specific place, Manchester in North California, sort of that was a one-to-one match. And then from there you start adding more. But that was sort of very, very minutious and old-fashioned reporting.
This is all data drawn from the Snowden archives.
It's Snowden data combined with open sources. Mm-hmm. And I think we both agree that the best stories that have been based on the Snowden archive are not just stories that explain the documents, but actually combine them with something from outside. And it's very easy to get drawn in and sort of report very in a very nearsighted way if you just look at the documents, and they represent a certain reality. But I am most comfortable when I'm able to compare that reality with the other one we sort of walk around in every day.
I mean, I think for those of us who have followed the Snowden revelations casually, we remember the big shock of information in summer of 2013 when Laura, you and Glenn Greenwald first reported on Edward Snowden. I remember one of those early stories was about Verizon and their relationship to the NSA. And since then, I think there's a little bit of numbness to parsing the stories. Like we now live in this world where we fully understand the expansiveness of surveillance. And when news stories dribble out, it's hard for them to make as much impact as that original one did. So with this story about the NSA and AT&T, can you describe, what you think it's important for the public to understand about that?
Well, if I can just loop back to the Verizon story, this was one of those stories that was sort of right there to do immediately after they looked at the first documents. I wasn't part of the team at that time. And so I felt that was important at the time, and that was how it was reported. But that's not the kind of journalism I feel I do best. And so I came in at a time where, the easy hits were sort of already played, and you had to sort of look across and look for different stories. And I'm more interested in the more structural the stories that's just what I'm better at. And so we started looking at those, and there were a number of stories. And I think when we did the reporting on AT&T, Laura and I both had some documents that didn't make it into that story, but that we both felt very strongly about because they had another appeal. They described the life and sort of the way you deal with the fact that you have these partners in the US that are companies. How do you comport yourself?
Yeah, and I would say a couple things. One, in terms of like the current status of how people respond to the reporting. I mean, post-Trump election, I've been inundated with emails from people, from filmmakers, activists, and everybody realizing that we need to be really careful if we're going to be engaged in activism right now, because of now that we know the extent to which the surveillance state is gathering information. So I think that there is a sort of shifting awareness, and obviously sort of the use of encryption has increased enormously. So there is this, on one hand, the government hasn't, reined in the powers of the NSA, but I think the public has become much more educated and knowing that they need to be careful if they're doing things like activism or journalism. But in terms of this story, so the NSA's partnerships with commercial companies are essential to what they do, and so it's partnerships with companies like AT&T, even Verizon, where they are able to gather the information, and this is one of their most protected partnerships. And so this is what this film is about, and what also the reporting we've done in terms of AT&T, because that's where the communications travel, not just U.S. Customers of AT&T, but the entire internet backbone runs off of AT&T's infrastructure.
So the new film that you're putting up on Field of Vision is called Project X. What is Project X?
So Project X it's a joint reporting project that involves a film, and then there's also a written component. And the written component was published with The Intercept. Henrik worked on that story with Ryan Gallagher, which sort of a deep dive into this really mysterious windowless skyscraper in downtown Manhattan that's been sort of the object of fascination for years in terms of what goes on inside of it. Do you want to say more about the reporting?
This is a building, it's a windowless building. Anyone who spends time in Lower Manhattan has probably passed by it and scratched their head for a second wondering what that is and before moving on.
And I remember quite accurately the moment when I sort of realized, oh, wow, this is the place. I wasn't sure at the time, but I was looking at Google Maps. This is a very important tool when you're doing the kind of reporting that I do. And there were these documents describing how NSA employees, when they go to partner facilities, where they go. And there was some information about going to the FBI field office in New York, which is the 23rd floor of the federal building downtown, which is right next to 33 Thomas Street. And then there was some other information that was a bit more confusing. And so I went down there right when I arrived in New York with Laura and went for a walk and looked at the building and realized that there was a doorbell. It's very silly. But there was a doorbell you could ring, and that doorbell, the buzzer, was described in the documents. That, of course, doesn't prove anything, but I felt at the time that I was already onto a big story and got very excited.
Yeah, one of our ideas at the Whitney that we didn't have time to do was to sort of take the exhibition outside of the museum and to sort of think of how we could sort of map surveillance architecture within sort of greater New York areas, because there are certain key points there. And we tried to do that, and we didn't have time. And so when we finished the Whitney, then we thought, like, okay, we still want to deal with this physicality and like the stuff that's happening, in plain sight that's in our city. And so we started, Henrik had first thought about a walking tour, and then I wasn't that interested in a walking tour. And then we sort of decided, okay, let's try to do something that focuses on this building, that uses some of the documents that we'd been fascinated by. And one of them are these documents, these handbook for traveling undercover as a spy, which is just this great narrative document that tells you what to do, how you should dress, what you should tell your family, what you should do if you get in an accident. And it's just really fantastic and narrative. And so we thought that would be a way to arrive at the building and then to sort of unpack the building. And I've been inspired by the film Her, which is this great use of voice, like voice as a character. That's someone who's part of the story, but you never see them.
Here's another clip from Project X with Rami Malek reading from an NSA handbook.
The cover vehicles are leased by the FBI through a commercial cover company. Personnel are aware of the FBI link but have no knowledge of NSA's involvement. no one should ever have contact with a leasing company. These vehicles are for official use only, to include the transport of NSA equipment and personnel who actively support NSA FBI programs. These programs currently include Blarney, Fairview, Stormbrew, and Oakstar.
It's funny, the language of that guidebook almost reminds me of like 1950s educational films, the kind that Rick Prelinger used to dig up. When does that book date from?
It's from 2013, I think. I don't have it in front of me, but I think it's 2013.
But it's very recent.
It's at the time when Snowden took the documents around that time. And it's been updated several times. That's often the case with the documents. So you have the same information often in several documents, but it's recent.
And so what the document narrates is how do you travel from the National Business Parkway in Maryland, which is right near the NSA headquarters, which is where they coordinate their partnerships with the companies, with AT&T and Verizon and others. How do you drive from there to New York secretly? And how do you do it? And so it has this kind of narrative drive to it. And then we decided, okay, we're going to do a physical, we're going to shoot the drive and use the same instructions that the guidebook recommends to arrive at the building.
So you collaborated on the film, and then Henrik and Ryan Gallagher published an article for The Intercept about this. How did you think differently about what the film was doing versus what the article was doing?
I think we thought them as independent projects, but that are linked, that they're a joint reporting project, but that they're each independent, and that they would not try to be a one-to-one mirroring of each other. And so I think for me, I didn't work with them on the written piece, but I was interested in the kind of mystery and kind of spy vernacular that we were using and the visual quality of this building, and sort of make that a sort of mysterious journey. And the article, I think, really wanted to capture like what are the origins of this building. And Henrik did amazing research identifying the architect and looking at his relationship to this building and other buildings.
And I think for me, I was lucky to be able to sort of go out and do tests and shoot the building, and also go down to the National Business Park and then come back to Laura and show her the footage. I'm nowhere near an experienced filmmaker, so just Laura's sort of very clear sense of this will work and this won't work was extremely helpful, because I wasn't sure that initially the elements we had would be able to come together in the way they ended up doing. But I had a strong feeling that something could work out, and that's where Laura's extremely sure hand was helpful.
And was part of one of the things that we want to really do at Field Division is find stories that can be told in different ways. So, there are certain things you can do with writing that you can't do with as a film, and there are certain things you can do with film that you can't do as a writer, and to how to combine the sort of best of both and work on stories that are collaborations, but are also use what are best about both mediums.
There's a really great article, for example, about the National Business Parkway written by a colleague of ours, Ingrid Burrington, which describes this sort of very, very strange non-place that sort of really happened after 9/11, where NSA started to work more with private contractors, and they had this whole new business of doing surveillance on cables. And this is sort of the new NSA, and she's been down there reporting, and that's a great piece, but it's such a visual place, and I felt that in order to capture this, you can do this, what people say about 1,000 words, it's a lot easier to just film it. And I think the story and the film try to do what each medium does best.
So what do we know about 33 Thomas Street and what goes on there with the NSA, and what do we not know?
Well, for starters, we are not 100% sure that 33 Thomas Street is indeed this building that the NSA calls Titan Point. We don't even know if that is a building. But what we've done is that we've shown all the different documents and things we found that indicate that is really what's going on. So, for example, one of the good strong matches we had was that the NSA documents indicate that There's surveillance going on phone lines going through what are called 4ESS switches. This is a sort of old-fashioned analog to digital phone switch for large quantities of phone calls that are offloaded from regional and local networks to long-distance networks. Well, this building happens to be the long lines building. There's just some simple facts that sort of make it very likely that this is the case. Then we had some more clean matches. For example, there's a specific program going on inside this location that NSA calls Titan Point, which operates through a satellite Earth link, satellite Earth station. And so we looked at FCC licenses for the whole area of New York and New York State, and it turned out that there was a one-to-one match with the two satellite dishes on the roof of this specific building. And so that also seems to indicate that if there is an NSA location that has a satellite uplink, it's very likely that it's this building. And so if you read the story, there's a bunch of these in the story. But as often is the case, because this is so protected in the documents, they have this thing that they call ECIs, which are basically information management systems that make it, in the situation that we're in, we have a set of documents from Snowden. You're not directly able to correlate the information because it's protected. They have ways of making sure that above the top secret level, there's also code names and things that don't sort of spill from one area of the information to the other. And so that was what we tried to look for, things that sort of could jump over that barrier and show that this was indeed the building.
In this clip from Project X, the actress Michelle Williams reads from an internal NSA newsletter.
Fairview and Blarney engineers collaborated to enable the delivery of 700 megabits per second of data traffic from the United Nations mission in New York. The initial feedback has been positive.
The Field Division website is run by Poitras with AJ Schnock and Charlotte Cook. I asked Poitras what they're trying to accomplish.
So what we're really interested in is how documentary filmmakers can be more responsive to the news cycles and be able to work more rapidly to tell stories that are more in short form rather than the long form that we do, which isn't to say that we don't still believe in the importance of long form, but that there is sort of I think we feel like as filmmakers an urgency to sometimes want to engage more quickly and then also creatively, like being long form films you spend years on and they take a while, and to be able to work more quickly is just sort of exciting and allows us to have an outlet. And then we also think that there's a strong need for it in the sort of news landscape, that you have more migrating to sort of online news sites, but that there's not the resources or the expertise in many news organizations to really take advantage of what video can do. So we're trying to fund films and produce films that sort of kind of work that thread that needle between those two, but sort of independent filmmaking and news gathering, and what we're sort of calling visual journalism. And so we're interested in different types of things, some fast responding or conflict zone, funding filmmakers who could be able to respond quickly. So we're working now on how we can respond to the sort of recent election of Trump in sort of very fast response. We're interested in kind of more innovative types of storytelling. So Josh Begley's piece on the wall between the U.S. and Mexico, it's called Best of Luck with the Wall, is an example of using kind of an innovative kind of approach to storytelling. And we're interested in series, and we're interested in these collaborations between filmmakers and writers. And so those are kind of the areas that we're interested in. And we're not bound by any particular outlet. So what we're trying to do is partner with many different publishers, depending on what the story is.
As an example of innovative partnerships, Field Division first announced Project X on the Twitter feed of the TV series Mr. Robot. The dramatic thriller, created by Sam Esmail, stars Rami Malek as a cybersecurity engineer who's recruited by a hacktivist leader known as Mr. Robot.
There's actually a connection between our film, our documentary film, and the Mr. Robot series, and particularly the season finale. So if you're a Mr. Robot fan and you watch the final episode, you'll notice that 33 Thomas Street plays an important role, which was actually a total surprise to Henrik and I. We were in the process of editing Project X, and we're both Mr. Robot fans, and then we see like, wait, what?
I saw it on Wikipedia of all places that someone had. I sort of watched the webpage for 33 Thomas Street, and I noticed someone had added a line about it being in Mr. Robot. And I already started, you're nervous when you worked for more than 6 months on a story that someone's going to scoop you, or that somehow your news angle is going to be taken away by someone else. And so I found the episode and realized that the whole episode is focused on this building, and the plot, it's such a crazy plot, actually has a lot of touching points with what we were working on. So then we saw it and realized that this was actually probably a good thing for us. And then Laura reached out to the team. And we ended up, maybe you want to tell this part of the story?
Well, I knew Sam, who's the creator of Mr. Robot, and I reached out and I said, hey, guess what? I said, interesting, I just watched the season finale, and we've been working on a documentary about the building as well. And so I shared him the link, and then I said, maybe we could find a way to coordinate on the release of the film. And so he was excited about that because they've been doing really innovative approach to how the show is reaching fans. And so we just thought that this is going to potentially open up a whole kind of new audience than we would typically get.
Laura, I want to ask you, when you started reporting on Snowden, you were based in Berlin for a long time. There were a lot of open questions about what it would mean for you to come back to the United States. You and Glenn Greenwald finally made this decision to come back in April 2014 to receive the Polk Award. Can you talk about what that decision was like? What was going through your mind when you came back to the U.S.?
Sure. I mean, both Glenn and I had received legal advice that in the immediate aftermath of being in Hong Kong and publishing internationally about the story, that it wasn't a good time for either of us to come back because what we knew was a massive investigation into the leak. So we stayed away, and the story had huge international traction. I mean, the kind of collected all mentality of the NSA, I think, made many people feel that their privacy was being violated, and that it wasn't only U.S. privacy that mattered, that people around the world, information was being collected. And so I think the fact that there was so much international outrage about what the NSA was doing provided us with, I think, a kind of more protection in the work that we were doing. And then receiving the Polk Award and other awards, it provides another layer of protection. So we just thought that it was a good timing to coordinate coming back to receive the award and come together on the same plane to make it really hard for the government if they were going to either try to question us or worse. So we just thought we would use as much pressure as we could for that moment. And I'm
curious, for all the speculation of that the government could make it hard on you and Glenn Greenwald and other people who do this work, have you ever had any direct interaction with the government around this story?
Well, I mean, I've been on a government watch list since 2006, so I know that way predated my reporting on the Snowden material, and the way that these watch lists works, you don't really know when you're on or when you're off this list. So I imagine that they still pay attention to what I do and where I'm based. But I've never been approached by the government about the Snowden.
No one with an earpiece has ever asked you about Edward Snowden.
No. But I do know that there's been monitoring of physical monitoring, particularly in Berlin after I traveled there after Hong Kong.
So now there is a movement to call for a pardon of Edward Snowden. There's an pardonsnowden.org. It has a prestigious list of supporters, including George Soros and Apple's Steve Wozniak, and you're a member on that list. Can you summarize the case for pardoning Edward Snowden?
Yeah, I mean, so the way that the Espionage Act works, which is what he's charged under, you cannot present a defense of why you would take the actions he did. In other words, that the government illegally spying on U.S. citizens, for instance, and you can't make that defense. And so the Espionage Act is sort of inherently doesn't allow for due process. And I think that that's one of the sort of strongest arguments. And I think that the sort of the public right to know and the public service that the reporting has, I think, provided is, a very strong argument. I mean, the reporting we've done is, received a Pulitzer for public service. So I think all those reasons that people have pushed for his pardon.
I want to thank Laura Poitras and Henrik Moltke for talking to me. You can watch their short film, Project X, on the website fieldofvision.org. Pure Nonfiction is distributed by the TIFF Podcast Network. Thanks to our team, series producer Michael Scotti Jr., sound mixer Kyle Murphy, web designer Cross Strategy, marketing coordinator Sarah Modo, social media master Jordan Smith, and executive producer Rafaela Nehausen. I'm Tom Powers. You can follow me on Twitter at THOM_Powers. You can read our show notes, learn about live events, and sign up for our newsletter at purenonfiction.net.